So, just again, as a reminder, final paper, you're going to do it. 2 weeks from today, we're getting close. Yeah, and then 3 weeks from today, we'll do our review for the final. All right. So, this is where we ended Carolingian culture, where Charlemagne basically was trying to bring back more, not necessarily Latin culture. Well, kind of did bring back Latin culture because they started using sort of a new form of Latin, but that's kind of the next slide. But they're bringing back culture to the West, learning from out of Europe. Einhard wrote Charlemagne's biography. He also worked on the chapel, which here, Aachen, and then the Caroline Minuscule, which was, specific form of writing. It made it easier for us later to be able to read, because, Old English is hard enough to read anyway. Right, yeah. So as I was getting ahead of myself, as I often do, scholars started reforming Latin because, as we've seen, Latin started to branch off into the various languages that we have today that formed from Latin. So they essentially recreated Latin. So royal officials made this new-ish Latin into the royal language. So the Latin derivatives, so Italian, Spanish, French, etc., were spoken just by whoever was in whatever region they were spoken. So nobody really spoke Latin anymore, unless you were a court official. Yeah. And and not just, educated, but like upper crust, working in the court. Yeah. Also, when it came to art, it was typically illuminated manuscripts, which again, we've seen a little bit of with the monasteries. I've got a lot more images up here in just a minute. Which, I would argue that, at least that the church in Aachen, I would consider that some pretty impressive art, although I don't know how much of it today was put up later. I don't know how much of it was there, like, in Charlemagne's time. So, I don't know. I don't know how ornate it was when Charlemagne was around, I guess is what I'm saying. But when it comes to illuminated manuscripts, like, they barely got any words on the damn page. But again, besides just the ridiculous intricacies of this, as I was mentioning with the monasteries, they had to use really specific ink, really specific pigments to get a lot of these colors. And some of them were not native to the regions where they were. They had to trade from very far away to get these pigments. So it not only showed the intricacies of the people doing this, but also the reach of these monasteries to be able to actually access these trade routes that didn't exist for most of the rest of the world, or at least the rest of Western Europe. So yeah, this is a flex in every sense of the word. This is a flex in ways that you don't see immediately. It's like, oh, okay, well, they drew all over the page. It's like, yeah, well, the stuff they drew with had to travel like hundreds, if not thousands of miles by ship and or horseback through pirates and bandits at a time when there weren't typically merchant caravans. So yeah, it's a whole thing. Here is the famous opening of, I forget which gospel this was, but this is like when you see the Book of Kells, if you look up right now Book of Kells, this is probably going to be the image you'll see. This is the famous, again, it's like the opening page of one of the Gospels. The Book of Kells was written in, I want to say around 1000 AD, maybe 800 AD. It was when the Vikings were around, because they were in, the monks were in one of those big round towers, which were specifically made to hopefully not get hit by the Vikings. So they saw the Vikings coming, and one of the monks went out to the peat bog and buried this particular copy of the Bible they'd been working on. And the thing about peat bogs is they're anaerobic, I think is the proper term, which is to say they don't have a lot of oxygen once you get under the peat. So it preserved the hell out of this book. And this is one of the ones that you can, if you're, a archivist or historian, they'll take the glass case off the top and let you turn the page, because that's how well preserved it is. I think I've got a bunch of images. Yeah, I got a bunch of images from the Book of Kells. Again, this is the main one, because it's really pretty, but there's a lot of other stuff going on in the Book of Kells. A lot of other pages where the colors are really, really, just maintained still after all this time. Which again, it was buried in a peat bog. It was buried in the mud, and it took quite some time to really restore as much as they could. But the fact that it is in any shape at all is damn impressive. So yeah, a lot of real neat pages out of that. All right. So when it came to the Carolingian Church, and we're going to see the orders of medieval society later, which are similar to this, but different, so kind of keep that in mind. For Carolingian society, you had the monks, the bishops, and then everybody else. Laymen is just your regular people. That's why if someone's talking about, I don't know, a car engine, and you're like, okay, well, give me the layman's explanation of this. Give me the explanation that a normal person can understand, because I don't know what all these numbers mean. It's oh, well, your 226 is throttled out, and it needs a 453. It's I don't know what any of that means. Yeah. So monks were considered the highest of the orders because they were seen as closer in their relationship to God, because they would they dedicated their entire lives to spiritual pursuits, copy manuscripts and praying and trying to understand more about the nature of God, etc. Bishops, sure, that was their job, but that wasn't their entire life. Monks, it was their entire existence. So Charlemagne and his son Louis supported monasticism. They further standardized Benedictine law. So thanks to Charlemagne, again, they further pushed what Pope Gregory had and really made monasticism one of the central tenets of the early medieval church. When it came to bishops, they were largely employees of the government, as I also mentioned last time. The church was a branch of Charlemagne's government, which I know feels weird today in America, but like in Britain, that's how the Anglican Church is. It's just part of the government. So that's how Charlemagne viewed the church. And at least for the Holy Roman Empire, it kind of made sense. However, the bishops in Charlemagne's early church were typically of noble blood because of the way heredity went. The land and whatnot would get split up among everybody, and to avoid everybody murdering each other, like what would often happen, they would typically decide amongst themselves who would get the royal title, or not royal title, but like noble title and money and stuff, and then who would go off to be a bishop, because they still made good money as a bishop. It was a cushy job. But if you were raised as a noble, you were raised as a warrior. You were raised to fight. So you had all these nobles. You had all these bishops who were nobles, and therefore, at least in the modern understanding, were basically knights. So that was a little bit weird in like our modern understanding of like the difference in a bishop and like a medieval knight. So here, of course, you have the monks. Oh, I don't have anything else. There's the monks. Right. So agriculture was still kind of in a rough shape. It was largely a subsistence economy where they only really grew enough food to survive. They didn't have enough to trade, because again, if you only have enough to survive, you don't have enough to send anywhere else. Though typically they had enough that they could store some in case there was, a famine or flood or a blight. I'm thinking about RimWorld again. So like if something did happen to their crops, they wouldn't immediately starve. But again, not so good that they could send a bunch off to sell or trade for other stuff. So it was very stagnant. And another thing that's going to compare to the next chapter that I need you guys to keep clear in your heads. Manorialism. So manorialism is this plot of land that was given by the king to a noble, but specifically manorialism, at least in the definition that I'm going to give, this was worked by peasants who had to pay the dues to the noble. So manorialism is more the relationship between the lord, who lived in the manor, as you can see from this like children's book drawing. The lord lived in the manor, and then the peasants worked the fields and paid their rent to the lord. So the manor and the various lands around it had various fields, usually a watermill, because they would typically be on a river, and then of course the local church. We'll look at the fields a little bit later, because there were certain types of fields. So Charlemagne only had one remaining legitimate son by 813 and named him co-emperor, so there wouldn't be any kind of like question about who was going to be in charge when he died. So Louis tried to do the same and named one of his three sons co-emperor, but then when he died, the Frankish tradition took over, and these three sons had it out. So Lothar tried to take over, and this led to a basically three-way civil war. Thankfully, this only lasted 3 years, which, I mean, any war for any amount of time is not great, but a 3-year civil war in the 800s is not very long at all. So in 843, they had the Treaty of Verdun that split the kingdom into 3 parts, and each brother got one. So rather than murder 2 of them and one takes over, they actually split the kingdom. Because, I mean, it was a big kingdom, and they could handle each part individually. And in fact, when you look at it, that's kind of a familiar map. Because you've got France over here, you've got Italy and some extra up here, and you've got what will eventually become at least part of Germany over here. So, now granted, a lot of this in the middle is going to change hands, and it's going to cause a lot of trouble, but we're starting to see the formation of the early European map as far back as the 800s, which is pretty cool. That just shows how long Europeans have been fighting each other. And then, of course, the Papal States down here, but we'll get to that later as well. Yeah. It's like, oh, well, this little bit of land, they took that little bit of land from us, so we're going to fight them for the next 700 years. Yeah. Yeah. That's right. There's the Pig War and the Bucket War and our training cadre accidentally crossed the border and like shot a missile into a mountain. But thankfully, it was Switzerland, so everybody was cool with it, and we didn't have a war over that one because we don't want to bother Switzerland. They're fucking crazy. That one was that's on the list of almost wars that happen in Europe. Yeah. Or what was the one where I think it was a French detachment went out, it was like 7 guys. They came back, it was 8 guys. They'd found some like random Italian mercenary that just joined them. It's like, what? Europe's insane. I got no better way to start this. So, Vikings. So, with Europe eating itself, Northmen, Norsemen, the Norse, or just Vikings as we often call them here, made their way out of Scandinavia, largely Denmark and Norway, raided Ireland, Britain, western parts of the Carolingian Kingdom. I mean, they hit all over the place. I'll get to that in a minute as well. Now, the thing, though, the reason, because I'm, I'm a little pedantic. When you say Vikings, it's the same as saying, like, pirates, essentially, or raiders, is more or less what that means in Old Norse. It's a little more nuanced than that, but it's the same idea. Vikings aren't a people; it's a profession. I think is probably the better way to put it. So the Viking raids were just raiders, independent acts of piracy, just groups of dudes coming down, taking crap, and leaving. This wasn't an invasion. This wasn't, Denmark or Norway trying to come and take land from the Carolingian powers or England or whatever. That comes later. And the thing about the Vikings is they were really good at what they did. Their boats were shallow bottomed, so they could sail up rivers and hit any settlements along the rivers. And as we've seen, most settlements are along rivers. But also, their boats were seaworthy, so they could just take their boats and go across to England or to Ireland or all the way to freaking Iceland and Greenland and eventually even North America. Wasn't an easy trip, but they could. Typically, they would hit churches because they were mostly undefended and it had lots of gold and silver. So, low defenses, big reward. That's what you want. They weren't, again, this mythical thing of, oh, they wanted to have a good fight and die in battle. It's like, no, they wanted to go in, get stuff, and get out. That's what raiders do. This whole dying in battle and going to Valhalla thing, that was like from way before when like there were wars within Scandinavia. Like this whole, we will die in battle against the warriors of the South. Like, no, they don't give a shit about that. So here's a map of some of the levels of raiding they did. And obviously, England, Ireland, Northern Europe, but like they made it into the Mediterranean. They hit northern Italy. They hit Sicily. They were all through Russia. They hit damn Constantinople. That's not something you think. They were hitting the Islamic lands up here in northern Turkey. They were in the Black Sea. They were in, I don't remember what this sea is over here, but Caspian Sea. They were all over the place. If they could get their boats down the river, they would. Yeah, that's wild. And so that said, a lot of these guys will just like stay and settle. So there's a lot of Norse genes spread out all over Europe and even like Western Asia. I've got a friend who lives in Italy, and I think she's northern Italy. Anyway, she's got Viking genetics, or Norse genetics, because of some of the raids where the guys just like decided to hang out and just assimilate into society. This is a nice place. Imagine after living up in, Scandinavia, and then you're down here in the freaking Mediterranean. I think I'd hang out. It's nice. Here we are. And this is just a settlement. This is where they settled down. And obviously, coming from Scandinavia, they really settled in England. In fact, England I don't recall as much, but in Ireland, like all the major cities in Ireland, Dublin, Weatherford, Wexford, Cork, those were all built by Vikings. The Irish didn't build cities, not until the modern day. But like the medieval Irish, they didn't build cities. The Vikings did. And then you can see, of course, Iceland and Greenland, and then, of course, off to Vinland, which is North America. Okay, they settled in southern Italy. Okay, so my friends in southern Italy. Anyway, and then again, Black Sea, Caspian Sea, all the way up here through the Rus states. This is all over the place. But obviously, we're going to be focusing up here. But it's just really interesting to see how much this group of people spread. Okay, green is subjected to raids, but little to no Scandinavian settlement. But yellow, at least, settlement. So there was some settlement here in the south of the Black Sea. That's cool. And then, of course, down here in southern Italy and Sicily. Which, again, like, Mediterranean Sea, man, that's nice. And just some pictures from the History Channel show, The Vikings, or Vikings, I think it was just called. One of the last things the History Channel had, besides just, like, various reality shows. Anyway. Right. And normally I show a video here, but we are a little bit crunched for time, so it would have been more from the Dark Ages documentary. So we have Charles the Bald. He was made emperor in 875. He tried to reunite the Carolingian kingdoms and didn't do so good. He then tried to make his way through the Alps to help the Pope and died. Or rather, he was retreating through the Alps after trying to help the Pope and died. So, even worse. So, not so great. And then we had Charles the Fat in 881. Yeah. Again, remember, Charlemagne is French for Charles the Great. But apparently Charlemagne just rolls off the tongue so well, we call him that rather than Charles the Great. Now we have Charles the Bald and Charles the Fat, so not very polite. He had hardly any power. His nobles actually completely kicked him out in 887 when Paris was besieged by Vikings. He was the last legitimate Carolingian ruler, at least in the French portion of the Carolingian kingdom. Because we're going to see later, this was the last Carolingian ruler, like, a couple more times. But I guess this was, like, in the French side of it, as far as legitimate Carolingian. And we're also going to see, like, this pattern a lot of this really fantastic, almost unrealistically amazing ruler like Charlemagne. and then immediately his sons and grandchildren just fuck it up. So here we have, I guess this was Charles the Bald? I don't know, he's got a crown on. Because this one's Charles the Fat, if you can tell. No, it wasn't this one. I was going to say, I know there was a medieval ruler who had to be lifted by the medieval version of a crane to be put on his horse. But that was Louis the Fat, who was a later French king. Yeah. And there's Paris being besieged. Right. Yeah, that's it for that chapter. So the Carolingian Empire only lasted 80 years, but it really did create not just the framework for the Middle Ages, which, by the way, the Middle Ages lasted about 1,000 years. And it did create, in my opinion, pretty much the framework for, at least in terms of the boundaries, for modern Europe in many ways. But yeah, it did create, for the Middle Ages, kingship was tied to the church. Yeah, the demarcation for modern Europe was created, at least France and Germany. And with Constantinople really becoming very insular and focusing all of its attention on not dying, Western Europe was taking care of itself, and so it was receiving neither influence from the Greek Constantinople or even really truly Latin Rome. It was becoming its own thing. So this was truly the beginning of Europe as its own thing. Because before this, it was Rome. It was just part of Rome. But now Europe is becoming its own thing. And that's kind of neat. That's kind of a neat thing just sort of see unfolding. All right, we've got plenty of time, so let's go ahead and go to chapter 8. All right, this is called the Romanesque Central Middle Ages. So we're still, well, because it's following off of Charlemagne's kingdom, it's still kind of following the patterns of Rome, but we are becoming more, European as we're getting into the Middle Ages. So, but we don't get, because this is like the Central Middle Ages, and then the next chapter is the High Middle Ages, which is like Gothic architecture and huge cathedrals and all of that. So that's why we have this sort of in-between section. Ow. Granted, once Charlemagne died and his sons and grandsons screwed everything up, power very quickly decentralized and returned to regional lords. And this is the one that I want to make sure you know is different from manorialism, and that's vassalage, where, for my definition's sake, is specifically where the vassalage will swear allegiance to the Lord. Again, this is, they would swear military service to someone more powerful, typically a lord, in exchange for lands and protection. But the vassalage is specifically the swearing of this oath. The lands are just what is given to them. And the relationship between the vassal and the people working that land is manorialism. That's a separate thing. And once again, we're back at petty kings. We're back at the lords who had lots of competition. They didn't have a lot of power, and they really didn't have a lot of legitimacy. With Charlemagne gone, with Charlemagne's really his bloodline, at least in Rome, in France gone, anybody who was taking power was only really there because they had power. They didn't have power because of who they were or what sort of divine legitimacy they supposedly had. A couple more terms here. So you have the keep, also known as the donjon or dominant point, which was the tower that was typically erected at a elevated location. And then the motte and bailey castle would have the motte, or mound of earth, where the keep was, and then the bailey was the outer wall that surrounded the land and the motte. Basically this. This is like a teeny tiny Greek polis. Just imagine a Greek polis, but in micro. You've got the high part where all the important stuff is, then you have the low part where like everybody hangs out, and you've got a wall, and usually like a moat. Like that's it. This is the most simple, basic bitch castle you can have. You got a hill, you put a fort at the top of the hill, you got some space down here to put the rest of your stuff because you can't put everything on top of the hill, and then you put a wall around it. Motte and Bailey Castle. Again, when I worked upstate, I worked at I taught at Tri-County Tech, and the building I taught at was at the top of a hill, and I would have students come in sometimes like red-faced and sweating. It's like, okay, sit down before you pass the fuck out. I know you've just come up the hill. So it felt like we were at the top of a Motte and Bailey Castle sometimes, because you would generally walk outside, and no matter which direction you looked, you were looking down a hill. It was compared to living down here in the lowlands, upstate is just incredibly hilly. And that's before you even get to the actual mountains. All right. In the year 9/11, anyway, last Carolingian king died. Again, I don't know if this is like a less legitimate Carolingian king, or if this is a different one that was like in Germany or whatever, but it doesn't matter. What's important is Conrad, Duke of Franconia, was made king. He wasn't really that popular of a king, but when he was on his way out, he made Henry the Fowler, who was Duke of Saxony. Okay, so this is Saxony, so this is in the Germanic lands. Made the Duke of Saxony king. Henry defeated the Magyars, which are essentially Hungarians, and then attacked the Danes, who sued for peace. So this was basically preempting the Vikings by hitting them first. Now, that's all well and good, but what's more important is his son, Otto the Great, obviously not named the Great from, birth, but earned that. He took the crown in 936 at Aachen, which, is Charlemagne's capital, so obviously there's some important stuff going on. He defeated the Magyars decisively, which ended their ongoing threat to the nation, and this really cemented him as an important ruler in this sort of transition period where we had Charlemagne and then everything kind of went to hell. And now we have Otto the Great. He was named emperor by Pope John the 12th. I can read Roman numerals. He rescued the papacy of Italy he rescued the papacy from the King of Italy because, again, nobody really gets along with anybody. Even though John had a apparently dubious character, and let me just read that part. Here we go. His critics charged that Pope John had ordained a deacon in a stable, accepted money to ordain priests, committed adultery with 4 women, one of whom was his niece, turned the papal palace into a brothel, blinded his godfather, castrated a rival, was an arsonist, drunkard, and a gambler. So, normal Pope stuff. Which then again, it just immediately brings me back to, was it Assassin's Creed Brotherhood where you punch the Pope in the face at the end? It's very funny. Because you were in Rome. Yeah. Punch the Pope in the face. That was so weird. Which, to that, so Otto, like Charlemagne, was serious about using the papacy to back up his legitimacy, so he got rid of John the next year and put a more, or I should say, a less controversial pope in charge. So the Ionian system, this increased the power of the empire over the church. The imperial government could appoint bishops, priests, could deal with the church lands as they saw fit. And this is going to begin a back and forth of the government, at least the imperial government, takes all this power from the church, and then the church takes all this power back, and it's going to be back and forth for the remainder of the semester. Otto the Second, Otto the Third sucked, and by the year 1000, the Ionian dynasty was gone. So once again, we had a moment of a pretty good ruler. I mean, again, he has the great moniker on his name, so clearly he did pretty good. But that sort of thing isn't hereditary. And, we don't have, like, an Ionian dynasty anymore. But here he is, apparently. Very bedazzled crown going on there. And here's the land that he held, which is basically everything like east of France. And this would pretty much become the Holy Roman Empire going forward. Just like all this Central Europe stuff. It would move a little bit over here sometimes, because I know Bohemia was part of it later on. Moravia too? Moravia just gets ingested. Moravia doesn't last very long. So this kind of becomes the core of the Holy Roman Empire until, Napoleon. All right. So, how about England? So through the 800s and 900s, England was largely under the control of the Danes, which is just yet another term for the Norse. Again, not Vikings, because the Vikings were just raiders. These guys are coming in and taking political power. But we do have a number of Anglo-Saxon kingdoms fighting back. King Alfred of Wessex, King Alfred the Great of Wessex, I should say, managed to gradually push the Danes out over the course of his 20 years in power, and even built a navy in order to stop the Danes before they even got there. And, oh, well, get this in a minute. Boop. So during this, constant conflict with the Danes, England, well, the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, which is to say England, became much more efficient, divided up land into hundreds, which is to say an area with 100 families in it, creating ship taxes so that each port city would be able to fund at least one ship for defense. So yeah, England, part of the reason why England became as strong as it was, I mean, it's still one of the top countries today, is because of this constant pressure very early in its creation from outside forces, and this generational trauma of we've got to keep these invaders out. Now granted, it's they're still saying this today, but it's just really fucking racist. But yeah, it's so ship taxes, very efficient, even tax codes, which I know again is super boring, but in terms of running an efficient government, was a pretty big deal. However, the Danes were more than the English could handle, and by 980, King Canute of Denmark and Norway conquered all of England, at least for a while. We'll talk more about Canute a little bit in a little. Actually, no, I think I got a picture of Canute, and then I will bring this thing up. So here is a statue of Alfred the Great. Obviously, English historians and sculptors aren't at all biased towards their past heroes or anything. The Great Heathen Army, as they called the Danes. They largely settled in York, made their way out, and attacked all around England. Oh yeah, here's Canute. So, supposedly, Canute was insane and demanded that his throne be brought to the seashore, and that he would command the ocean to recede from him. And as high tide came in, he got wet. So yeah, it didn't quite work out for old Canute. Okay, I'm gonna get a little further in. There is a video I do need to show you about at least this part of the Vikings, because it's sort of on the test. All right. Meanwhile, in France, there was some level of Carolingian power. Um, the nobles continue to weaken it. So let's see. 936, we had King Louis IV. Had less land and power than his nobles, to the point that if he was going to travel outside of his land holding and therefore be on the land of his nobles, he had to get permission from them. Which, like, in what way are you the king if you have to ask permission from your nobles to travel outside of your property? So after the last Carolingian in France, I guess, died, we had Hugh Capet crowned king in France. So they didn't have much in terms of royal authority, again, like with going to the Pope and having the Pope give you this power. He had a lot of vassals and therefore a lot of land. So he had power, as opposed to, like, authority from the Pope. So here's France, La France, in 1030. So you've got the royal domain around Paris here, and then all these various other noble holdings all scattered throughout. And you can see some of these. You might actually recognize some of these. The Aquitaines, Toulouse, Marquis de Goth, Vascon, Burgondes? Oh, there's Bourbon. Yeah, there's one of the royal families. Champagne, obviously. The Normandy, which is going to be important. There's Flanders. Yeah. All right. The last for this section. The three orders of medieval society. Again, different from the three orders of Carolingian society, but that's just how the book's written. So we have laboratores. This is Old French, or Old English, which is also Old French. Those who work, these are the farmers. They are needed to feed the people. This is the majority of the population. Again, this is, if you show up next semester, these are mentioned again. Bellatores, those who fight, these are the knights. Or, well, technically the nobles who were the knights. You need those to keep enemy kingdoms from coming in and murdering you. So that's pretty important. And then you have oratores, those who pray. Because life expectancy wasn't great, everyone's always, thinking about when it is they might check out. So having God on your side was very important, and not just when you're going to check out, but also the fact that we should probably have the kingdom running at all. It made the priest class consider the most important. And then the king, who was technically second estate, but then placed, on a higher level, ruled over the various parts of the kingdom to keep them running more or less harmoniously. I mean, obviously, the peasants were always going to be stepped on, and the nobles and bishops were going to be having their little spats, but, keep them from murdering each other too much. So you've got the oratores, your This is technically a monk, not really a bishop, but same idea. And then the fighters, which these aren't actually, these wouldn't be nice. These are your regular line infantry, and these would be probably peasants that were drafted. So this is not a very accurate image I've grabbed. Maybe the guy back here in the bucket helmet, if he can afford that, he's a noble. And then, of course, the peasantry being repressed. All right. So rather than moving on to the monastery at Cluny, I'm going to stop the stream. I'll put the link up for the video for you guys online. Oh, my legs. And then I'm going to find that video for this. It's just a small portion, again, of the Dark Ages thing. But for the Vikings. So, see what I can find. And then we'll continue